That's great. Cool. You want to kick us off?
All right. Welcome, everybody. We got a really big show for you today.
Yeah.
No, I'd like to thank IBAT. I'd like to thank all the state associations that participated in this. This is part of our educational series. Talk to bankers every day. And one of the questions that, what is this BAAS thing? And how do you pronounce that? BAS, banking as a service.
What's a sponsor
What's
bank?
a sponsor bank? And we try to convey these things in layman's terms so everybody can understand it. There's a lot of misinformation. I think there's a lot of things that go on that make things a little more complicated than they need to be.
And we approach this from FinTech Cowboys and sound bites. And today we're going to kind of take the OGs here with Cross River and let them tell the story, right? And so front to back, we're going to actually hit, I think what's really cool is the history book, right? From Phil's perspective, going back to 2008, and sort of what has happened in the last dozen or so years in banking as a service, sponsor banking, FinTech, which it was some cool numbers. Walking out of today, you should have a good overview of what's going on. Yes. And moving forward, it won't be those little sound bites.
Yeah, the questions I want to see answered here today for bankers, the calls I get all the time are, this sounds cool. I understand there's a lot of money to be made. Explain these things to me. And then I've got to go to my board and explain this to them. How can I do all of this to where this makes sense? Guys, this is dollar signs. This is huge money in being a sponsor bank, banking as a service. What we want to do is break this down. One of the most popular questions we get all the time is, what if I do this? How do I find the fintechs? And I tell everybody, don't worry, they're going to find you. And then the other one is, how do I vet a fintech to find out a good fish from a bad fish, right? Who do we throw back and who do we keep? And so there's some technologies today that didn't exist in the past. And so we're going to hear from Cross River, who by all measurements is number one. They're focused a lot more on the asset side of being a sponsor bank than on the card side, but they can do both. And that's important. And so they'll be able to cover all of this. And I want to introduce Phil Goldfeder.
And thank Phil Goldfeder.
I
mean, who shows up, right, to tell your community banking brethren about all the cool things you've done and how you do it and everything. We appreciate you so much. So thank you.
Yeah, every time we've ever asked, they've stepped up to try to help other bankers.
Firstly, let me just say, Dave and Tanner, I mean, you guys are the coolest bankers I've ever met. And the funniest part is, I think, oftentimes, and I remember coming to my first trip to Texas and not really sure what to make of it, right? Is this going to be, am I going to learn something new? Am I going to, am I going to be able to collaborate with people who can help us? Am I going to be able to be in a room with people that potentially I can help? And from the day I met you guys, it was, number one, it was real, right? It was pragmatic. It's what are we actually doing? What are we actually talking about to solve problems and get things done? And number two, you didn't do it like a traditional banker. And I hope traditional bankers don't get offended by that, because I don't mean to offend anybody, but you did it with, again, as you sit there today with a smile, with a sort of sense of, guys, we're here to help. Like, what do we do? How do we do it? Let's have some fun while we're doing it, right? And I think it's important. I think, it's what you said is so true. This is about being successful. It's also about servicing your customers. I talk about this till I'm blue in the face, right? This is not about innovation for the sake of innovation. It's innovation for the sake of your customers want to access their financial services differently today than they did 2 years ago, 5 years ago, and definitely 20 years ago, period. That's all that should matter to you. Because, you could say, well, I'm nervous or I'm scared and I don't want to do this. Well, that's okay. Because at some point, your customer is going to say, okay, then we're going to go find someone who will, period. And it doesn't have to be the tech companies that get to own the world, right? I think there's a huge space for regulated banks, community banks to step up and fill the void and meet their consumers where they are. And I've said that a lot over the last few days as we spend a lot of time, Cross River spends a lot of time, obviously working with community bankers, working with our technology partners, but also working with regulators. And it's always this question of, well, why are you doing this? Or why are you taking that step? And we say, because that's what the customers are demanding. That's what the tech companies are demanding.
I'll raise my hand here. I'm gonna raise my hand. So this is one of the things, again, everything you said, I agree with. It's also about profits, guys. One of the things that you'll find with most institutions, I tell people this all the time, that bankers wake up Monday morning and they go out onto the field for the coin toss and it's 14-0. And it's like, wait a second, that's not fair. And the big banks have an advantage. And what we're trying to do is bring the profitability scale to the community banking market. And so this is really important, not only in innovation and helping your customers, but in the bottom line. I mean, this, if you look at sponsor banks and what is a banking as a service, and you go across the spectrum in every earnings category, ROA, I mean, everything there is on
Number ones.
net interest margins, everything they're number one in every category.
Mhm.
Now, somebody will go, well, I disagree with that. Well, if you took PPP and then you took out the 1% yield on loans that were guaranteed and then went retroactive back and refavored everything, you would understand what I'm talking about. We understand this information.
Mhm.
Telling you, this is number one of number ones right here that we brought to you. We want you to really follow on the fact that there was a way back, like he's probably going to tell a story that's horrific. You wouldn't want to do. And so what we can do today to bring this type of technology and offering to bankers is really different and really inexpensive. You don't need a tech team. I always tell everybody, I just wanted to turn on the light. I didn't want to know how to wire the house.
Mhm.
So with that said, how did you guys get into this?
Quick data timeout.
Okay.
That might be helpful to level set. So there's, and I didn't look at the numbers this morning, I apologize, right about 75 sponsor banks, banking as a service banks today.
Right.
There are just south of 400 fintechs being serviced by those 75 in the US today.
Right.
There are a gajillion dollars. Is that fair?
Is that an accurate number?
That's a rough number.
Clarify
A
that number.
lot of money.
There's a lot more when we get to, healthcare and reg tech, other things that you can participate. But I'm talking about institutions, companies that rely on a charter to process for them. So a lot in the old days, this is almost like a rude thing to say anymore, but they called it rent a charter. And so rent a charter kind of evolved into.
Or an issuer. People would call it an issuer.
Sponsor issuer.
Right.
And that's
Rent a charter has obviously got a bad rap. The early stages of online lending and sort of sort of not everybody doing it the way it should be done. I think it's critical. I think that's what's most scary to community bankers, right? We don't want to get that label that we're renting our charter or we're essentially, sort of allowing tech companies to do what they want, but use us as kind of the regulatory cover, quote unquote. And I think we are a good example, and Cross River is a good example of how to do it the right way. Now, let me start this story, and this story, and I'll try to do it quick. And I know there's going to be questions, and there's always a good give and take. And I love talking to you guys because this is the most fun I'm going to have. I would say all day, but it's going to be all month, right? Cross River started, sort of our journey in technology in 2010, long before fintech was sexy, right? When online lending wasn't called MPL or marketplace lending, it was called peer-to-peer lending, right? And that's really what it was. It was sort of marketplaces where people can make loans and then folk could buy them on the secondary market. Lending Club was the beginning of it. Prosper were probably the first two companies. And this goes back, I think they started 2008, 2009. Again, no one knew what this market looked like. And we were very, very lucky, right? And so I like to think that we're the smartest guys in the banking industry. It's obviously not true. I think a lot of it sort of worked in our favor, just given when we started and how we started. And so Cross River was actually founded in 2008. Our charter was granted in June 24th of 2008. And so right off the bat, when you think about that, now most people would say, what are you crazy? Every bank is closing down. Like, what are you guys thinking? And this sort of goes to really our DNA and mostly credit to our CEO, Gilles Gade, who said, every other bank is de-risking, right? Rightfully so, right? Bad assets, regulatory sort of nightmares going on. Like the world was changing from the regulatory legacy systems everything was changing and shifting and everybody was struggling. And Gilles looked at the market and said, look, we need to find a way to provide financial services on the most basic level. And how do you do that? By opening up a community bank. Every community bank that's listening to us knows at their core, they're there to serve their community, period. Mm-hmm. And that's what we did in 2008, right? With no grand scheme of fintech. We didn't know what fintech was, right? Nobody did. We just sort of set up shop to sort of serve the community. And as you would have it, because we didn't have to change regulatory structures, because we didn't have to deal with troubled assets, because we had a clean balance sheet with assets to deploy and plenty of good place to deploy it, we did very well, right? We did very well. It helped our bottom line. And I know you guys, and we're talking to community bankers, and we want to talk about profits. Cross River was profitable in our 5th quarter. Okay, so understand what that means. Community bankers out there will understand that, like, there's that, like, whoa, right? And the beauty of being profitable in your 5th quarter, you get to think differently, right? You get to, like, okay, great, we're profitable, but like, what's the next step, right? Community banks are still closing all across the country. How do we make sure that we rise above that? And so we started looking for technology partnerships. And in 2010, it was exactly 2 years later, in June of 2010, we partnered with a company called Green Sky Technologies. They were recently acquired, I think sometime last year. Green Sky Technologies had a partnership at the time with Home Depot. Green Sky came with the technology. They had a partnership with Home Depot, and the goal was to offer people loans at point of sale, right? This was before BNPL, right? Today it's BNPL. This was where it started, way back when, right? It wasn't credit cards, it was a consumer loan from a bank, and they put out an RFP essentially for banks to respond. Now, 2010, community banks, maybe, you probably had more interest from regional banks, but it was just hard at the time for people to like focus on that, right? Again, they were still sort of getting their world back in order. And so it was partly because we had a relationship with their CEO. It was partly because we recognized we were able to build our program and our response to that RFP on top of the new regulatory structure without having to have changed anything, right? So we were very lucky. A lot of community bankers who are listening to us have been around for 100 years, right? And so there's an intrinsic foundation that needs to shift in order for them to do things differently. We were lucky. That being said, it doesn't mean that the person who has been around for a long time can't do it. Because what happens next in sort of the story of Cross River is sort of very telling, is that it's not like we turned on the spigot with this partnership with Green Sky and Home Depot. We were learning, right? We didn't do, $1 billion in origination in our first month, right? I have to go back and look. I couldn't even tell you, but it wasn't a huge number. And so we got to see what was required. How do we do this? What information do I need to collect? How am I going to underwrite that loan? How am I going to review it for money laundering or fair lending? Meaning, we basically took the bank portion and overlaid it on the technology and said, how do we partner together? And what information did we need Green Sky to collect at that register, at that point of sale, for us to feel good about originating that loan? And so the beauty of it is it was a slow start, and our growth story from there was very organic, meaning, and I'll stop in a moment, meaning from that point forward, we slowly built on that success, right? We slowly built on that success to bring on more partners, to build our own technology, and to continuously evolve the regulatory viewpoints we look at various partnerships.
I love it. So, okay, first thought and question. Most of the banking as a service sponsor banks that we've talked to, a similar story of maybe an accident is a strong word, but sort of fell into it, right? And I've also, from the technology side, I've heard a lot of people describe it as a complicated business customer, right? And so picture this, we're going about our normal day at the community bank. I have this complicated business customer come in, and they're basically saying, I want to extend your services to my customers, right? And these banks are formed. Is that a reasonable breakout story? Is that, you see that a lot around too?
Yeah, I mean, look,
digestible.
Well, yeah, well, I mean, look, it's funny because people look at us today and say, oh, they must, like I said, that's why I tell the story the way I do, right? Because people look at us and say, oh, well, they must have built their entire formation on the idea of fintech. And it's simply not the case, right? We were a community bank like any other community bank watching right now, right? And similar, we kind of, I don't say fell into it because it was strategic. We understood what we were doing, but we kind of started doing it. Interestingly enough, remember at the time, Lending Club was probably the largest, peer-to-peer lender. They came to us and said, look, we're working with another bank, but we love what you guys are doing. Would you serve as our backup bank, right? And so again, we weren't turning on the spigot. It wasn't like they said, oh, we'll come to you and here's all of our volume. It was quite the opposite. They're like, hey, would you serve as our backup? Which again, gave us some additional visibility, gave us additional education. We were able to understand what their program looked like. Yeah, go ahead.
Quick question. So how did you go about talking with your regulatory and your board? Hey, we're going to take a chance here. I get the idea that we're not throwing the frog into the boiling water. We're actually just turning the heat up a little bit as we go. So there's got to be a little bit of a selling process that goes on inside of the boardroom. And then we've also got the whole regulator issue when they come in and say, what in the world are you doing? How did you guys deal with those things early
Especially
in the
then,
game?
especially.
Yeah, exactly right. Today, it's like, oh, a lot of examiners and regulators kind of understand it. And fintech is
It's a lot easier.
today.
Yeah.
Not in 2010. And the answer is over communication and transparency. And so the way we looked at any business we got into, whether it was lending, marketplace lending, whether it was, even back then, exploring the idea of cryptocurrency, it was, and again, this is going back to 2010 and 2011, it was sort of really thinking it through. And before we would enter any business, we would do a thorough white paper, right? What are the risks? How are we monitoring for X, Y, and Z, right? BSA, AML. How are we looking at that? How are we going to manage it? How are we going to monitor it? Fair lending. And I go back, and they're interesting because they still exist in the bank, and at some point they'll be in the museum, right? We did white papers that we shared with everybody, right? We shared with the regulators. We shared with people who regulated us, and we shared with people who didn't regulate us. I mean, I remember sort of hearing the story of early in our business, meeting with banking commissioners from multiple states, right? Now, they had no regulatory oversight over us at all. We wanted their opinion, right? And so we would I remember going to New York, right? Meeting with the Department of Financial Services. At the time, it was the superintendent was Ben Lawsky, right? Hey, here's our white paper. Take a look at it. What do you think? Are we doing it right? What are your concerns? What are your, what would you do differently? It's similar with our examiners, right? I think the big challenge here is that most folks, when they do this, they do it out of, and I talk about this a little later, but they do it out of fear, and they kind of rush into it, and they don't take the time or think that they have the time. Most of those banks don't do it well, right? When a bank, even today, and I say this to any community banker that's listening to this, you don't have to be you don't have to make millions and millions of dollars tomorrow in your fintech business, right? Why don't you make tens of thousands of dollars tomorrow, build it the right way, make hundreds of thousands the next year, and make millions the year after that. In that you're giving yourself a foundation. The world of financial services is not finished yet, people, right? There is a lot of a runway ahead of us.
Great.
Start it today. And I think the biggest challenge that community banks have today, number one, is finding the right technology partner. And you guys have been critical. I mean, you guys have done such an amazing job of sort of showcasing and highlighting some of the technology companies that are out there that can help. We work, by the way, even when we need help with technology, and I've talked about this with you guys before, we wanted to build, early on in the PPP program, we needed to increase our liquidity, right? Because we thought you can only lend how much money you have. And so we wanted to do a really quick sort of draw in cash. We partnered with a company called Mantle, right? And literally in just a couple of weeks, built an online CD account opening process. And we raised $250 million in CDs in 15 days. 15 days. Now, we couldn't do it on our own. Now, we build a lot of our own tech. And we've talked a lot about, we have our own, we've built our own core. We have a lot of our own tech. But like when we need help, we go to, reliable technology companies. Through the PPP, we work with a company called Acrolis, right? That does, that does document reading and so on. And so we've tried to rely on experts where possible. And the beauty of going back to 2011, where we now partner with Lending Club, who is like a real big name in the industry, it also validated us, right? It validated the model. It's like, oh, okay, a major tech company is saying that these guys know what they're doing. And the evolution started from there, slowly but surely. And if you recall, at the time it was called pay-to-pay lending, then it moved into marketplace lending, similar to what we're going to talk about a bit more today. And I think, my colleague Jesse is going to be here to talk about it as well, it was called banking as a service. I think today it's actually called embedded finance more than banking as a service, right? And I remember going to our business development team 2 years ago, and they're like, well, we should come up with a new name for this. And I had been hearing embedded finance, and I went to them and I said, hey, let's call it our embedded finance team. And they're like, nah, that's never going to take. I go back to that, and that was sort of the marketing brain. I was like, banking as a service is just, a bit more confusing. And to answer your question a bit more specifically, what that means is that you don't have to be a fintech company because, the thought is, oh, Cross River provides the infrastructure for a fintech company. It's not that way. We provide infrastructure for any company that wants to be a bank. And so think about the buy now, pay later space right now. If you go in to buy a pair of shoes, or you go into, to a suit maker, right? You can get credit in that suit maker's store. And so now that suit maker is a bank, right? You're getting a loan from that guy right there. So when you think about what is embedded finance, you're taking the infrastructure of finance and you're giving it to anybody who wants it. And you're doing it in a safe way without sacrificing on consumer protections, regulatory compliance. And you know why? Because in the fine print, you're seeing Cross River, right? You're seeing that logo right there, which gives you the trust and reliability of community banking. And that is what every community banker brings to the table. Now, most of them don't give themselves the credit for that. And that's where the challenge lies, right? Well, can we do it? Like, what do we know? You bring what every community banker brings to the table is the trust and reliability of a community bank, period. So every single community bank doing it slow, doing it the right way, embracing the right partner. I can't hit that point hard enough. The right partner, because there's a lot of bad actors out there that are trying to rip off banks and rip off customers and make a quick buck and get out of there. It's about longevity. Right. Community banks, it's about longevity. Do it the right way now so you can last for the future.
This is good stuff. I know we're going to kind of dig into how do you pick a fintech and all that. Let me introduce Jesse, my buddy.
So I just didn't get the hat, so I got held. I was actually I'm actually at a fintech conference, and I was looking at my phone, and I was talking to someone actually about a tech that's actually designed to actually help community banks compete with it actually allows them to access real-time payments in a super seamless way. And I was talking to this founder, and it was an amazing solution. I just completely lost track of time, and I was like, all of a sudden I looked down at my phone, and I was like, oh, that's not good. So sorry I'm late, but I'll own it.
We're happy to have you. For everybody watching, Jesse's the head of technology at Cross River. He brilliant built half of everything there, and I think White is a genius. So
yes,
we'll call you a genius.
Yes, on this topic, right? We all have our things, but Jesse's like way out there on this topic. Really, really knows this, and has been through the whole life cycle. So thanks for coming with us, man. We appreciate it.
Yeah, no worries. Thanks for having me again. I'm so sorry that I think that I echo what Phil said though. You know, like in terms of first of all, I don't write a line of code. I dropped doing that a long time ago because I realized that there's much smarter people across River than me. But you know, I love working with banks and our partners and helping figure out how we kind of you know, I think keep community bank at the forefront of communities, right? And how we think about, you know, how they can be relevant and how they get access to technology, and more importantly, how they enable it for their customers, right? And kind of drive forward experiences. And so, you know, I think that what Phil was saying about how you solve things relative to the connection it makes for your critical customers is where we spend all our time and try to focus on.
That's awesome. We got a question, guys, asking about who are some of the best non-lending fintechs, right? And so from your perspective, and I know that's maybe a newer spot for you guys, right? I'm thinking about some of the cool names like Coinbase, right? And some of the fun things, the interesting things. But for a banker that's not necessarily looking to grow deposits, looking from a non-interest income perspective, what have you guys thought about that problem, and how have you approached it?
So I think that, you know, a bunch of these names are customers of Cross River in some way, shape, or form. And I think we do a lot of, like, I'd call heavy tech for them, right? So we'll do, you know, we built a proprietary core, right, that has lots of interesting pieces to it that they use to, you know, drive a lot of innovation and change. But, you know, I don't think that's necessarily, if I was a community bank saying, oh, well, in order to drive, you know, NII, I need to go make a massive investment in technology and, you know, go buy whatever the latest and greatest that whoever is pushing on me is going to solve all my ills. That the thing that I think both Phil and I kind of vehemently agree on is that the best way to solve the problem of, like, how can you kind of grow your customer base, how can you really meet them, is by meeting them, right? That was really difficult in COVID, right? You know, and now I think we're hopefully all getting back to some version of normal. I'm at a conference right now. I'm actually seeing people face to face. It's kind of amazing. But you know that, you know, I kind of live by the adage of 80-20, right? You know, 80% of your revenue comes from 20% of your customers. And probably it's even more finite for a lot of community banks out there, that their top 50 customers probably represent, you know, their most profitable, probably a significant chunk of their profits. I think you need to sit down with them and say, like, hey, how can we be better, right? What are the things that you're looking beyond us to solve? And you're saying, oh, well, I'm going to go to X solution because it fixes this, this, and this. And like, how to be a part of that? I think that embedded banking, like Phil mentioned, is one of those ways, right? So how do you think about becoming part of the new ERP platform that they're building as opposed to just being succumbed by some somebody else who says, oh, we're already there, right? I think you need to be part of those conversations, and you need to have some folks on your staff who can understand the root of the problem or the root of their challenge and say like, well, maybe we can solve that in a non-traditional way.
Yeah, one of the things I think that's out there right now for bankers is it's a bigger bank game. It's like, well, hey, I'm gonna have a $1 billion bank just to even have this conversation. And we've actually had banks as low as 170 million that have launched in one way or another as a sponsor bank. What advice do you have to the guys that have zero resources, no tech team, nothing? I mean, how do we get started here? And how would I pick a fintech if I was a little bitty guy? I think the democratization.
Phil smiling already.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that the problem is like, it's like, I don't think that in many ways you go there and play pin the tail on the fintech, right? It's a matter of, how do you find somebody that you understand and you get, right? That can you tell their story as well as they can tell your story. And so if you want to go be a sponsor bank and, enter that market, that's okay. But realize that it's probably, you're not going to make money on it for a while until you kind of get your feet underneath you. You understand what you're doing. You need to deal with making sure your regulator feels comfortable that you know what you're doing in that space, And so I think that ultimately, strategically, if you say, we want to drive more non-interest income, we want to increase our NIM spread, any of these things, right? They're outcomes. And so if your strategy works great, you will hit that desired thing. But I think that, what is it? It's man plans, God laughs, right? So I think that we have the best way and that we've seen success is where you kind of know where you need to get to, and that you don't have all the answers. And so you find a fintech or you find a partner in the industry who can help kind of make some introductions for you or whatever else. And like the sexiest one is probably not the right one, right? The one that solves a problem that makes sense to you and that you're like, I get it, right? I can talk to customers about this as the CAO or the CFO, and you don't need to bring in some tech person, right? But you can talk about it, you can be passionate about it, right? Because you get it, right? It's a problem you understand. You're like, oh, this is amazing, right? And there's plenty of those solutions out there that are not, whatever, $100 million fintech or a unicorn or whatever else, right? There's lots of guys girls starting companies out there that, could really impact your customers. And like, it's just a matter of putting yourself out there and saying, hey, I want to talk to you. I want to kind of come in and understand what you're doing. And candidly, it's like, I think it's one of the funny things, right? It's almost like a junior high school dance, right? You have the boys on one side, you have the girls on the other side. Both of them want to come in the middle and dance, but neither of them know how to do it, right? And so the first one that does it is the one who kind of says, you know what, it's okay. I'm gonna accept that I'm not gonna have all the answers. And I think that once you kind of get in the middle of that, what you end up finding is neither of you know everything, and that you help make each other better, and then you become passionate about it. I think then you find your more natural fit of like, is that the right business for you to be in? Can you add value there? Like the number of fintechs I've seen trying to solve factoring or solve something else that's like a funky business. I was talking to a CEO of another bank recently about crypto and crypto lending. And I was laughing because years ago, I did a lot of ABL lending, which I don't know if I look like it, but I did, right? But, we did a ton of asset-based lending when I was at Sterling. And for me, crypto lending is just a version of ABL, right? And so like, if you demystify some of this stuff, you probably have people on your staff who you can give a whole new life to by helping them understand that all we're really doing is taking the same problems and figuring out how to solve them more efficiently, how to solve them at scale. And that's how community banks, they take that core DNA, the stuff they're great at, that whether it's ag lending or any of these other things that people do that takes years to get great at.
Yep.
Just because you have a sexy platform doesn't necessarily mean you're good at it.
And one thing and this, I mean, we're in bankers helping bankers. I really hope everybody understands this. And I see this every day, and because it's easy for us to see it, right? Is that, like you mentioned, hey, I was talking to a CEO of another bank the other day. All right, this idea, we've always done this in banking where, I heard this vendor, what do you think, right? Or I know this person, should I hire them? We all talk to each other, and this is how we do things. When we get to this,
Phil, we absolutely say no. We say, Phil, no.
Right.
No.
But on this particular topic, there are, people that have done all of this. They've been through it all. They've already seen all of it. And it's amazing how much they're willing, especially since, I will say this real quick. When there's money involved and somebody's at the top of the heap, they're usually like, shh.
Right.
Right.
But not these guys.
Not the way that the sponsor banks operate in general. They're all dying to help each other.
Absolutely.
They're also dying to help new entrants participate in that. Do you see that every day?
Sure. I mean, listen, I think both Phil and I literally this morning got an email from, a bank CIO who we talked to, asking a question about something like, is anybody I know who does this? If I see something really interesting, or, I absolutely will ping a couple people. I probably make, I don't know, I would guess 4 or 5 introductions a week between just people who I think would be great knowing each other, right? And like, there's a couple companies and founders who I think have really interesting solutions. But one of the things you find is, I think a lot of these guys are so into the tech, and like they're so like, they built this, they figured out how to crack the safe.
Right.
But the problem is, right, they're using the little one that my son puts pennies in, and they have to realize it's a much bigger safe that they gotta start talking to the guy down the block, right? And so, they may not know how to talk to the guy down the block. Like the reason why I was a little bit late was I was talking to this founder of this company called Neural Payments. And
I talked to them yesterday.
Yeah.
Oh, you did, Mick? Yeah, I was talking to Mick. And I was like, him and I were, geeking out about payments and, all the other stuff. And he was like explaining all this stuff to me. And I was like, he's like, yeah, we're thinking about doing another round, whatever. And and I was like, Mick, you know what your problem is? No one understands what the hell you're talking about. Like you had a brilliant solution, right? That could help banks across the US, right? It could fundamentally change, acquiring, right? I think if it hits scale, right? And I look at it and I'm like, he needs community banks to say like, hey, I don't need to be at the mercy of Zelle, or I don't need to be at the mercy of whatever, right? This is a way to take back control, but like, he's not going to know those people. So I introduce him to some folks I know. There's a Shmulik Fishman who runs Argyle, who's randomly met through whoever. And, I look at what he's doing and how he could change KYC, right? And how you think about like, why are we doing KYC on somebody who's already employed if we can go to the employer payroll record and look at it and verify it? Like, am I just paying someone twice for some work that's already happened, right? You look at like Get Claire and the stuff they're doing to really enable, different types of lending that may not be something that a bank necessarily wants to do themselves, right? But can they offer that to consumers and proxy it, make a referral fee, make NII, and ultimately deliver a great experience and make that customer sticky so they don't go to a neobank or something, right? These are all things that you could do. Yeah.
It's funny, and I talk about, everybody's the social aspect. And we just did an interesting partnership with a company called PayTile. And their CEO is founder Anu, who's amazing. Sort of talks about the ability to move money in an anonymous world, right? I don't want to share my email address. I don't want to share my phone number, but we still want to transact, whether it's a tip and so we partnered with, she created this sort of geolocation, software that enables sort of the movement of money, right? But needed a bank to help her actually move the money. And so when you merge and you find these interesting companies trying to do things differently, Look, I think they're not a huge company right now. They're a tiny company right now, but I think they're going to be huge. I think as sort of the idea of what they're trying to accomplish grows, I think they're going to be really big. And I think when Cross River comes into it, you take a look at our news, right, and all the partnerships we've announced. Some of them are big names, but some of them are really small names, right? The goal here is to empower an ecosystem of people trying to change the world, and we're trying to power that.
So you guys, let me ask you back to a fundamental question. Okay. I want to be a sponsor bank. How do I find a fintech?
Wait, can I take this one, please? Can I just jump into this one? All right, Phil, I remember a conversation at the Roundup in Fredericksburg 45 years ago. You're on a panel with Brian Unruh from MBKC. And his answer to this question was have a conversation. Now, it's that simple. And I think it's what you guys both just got done talking about is just talk to people, man, and it's amazing. I am living proof of how well that served us, right? And a lot of times I end up helping people and a lot of times they end up helping me. And it's pretty incredible just over time. If you take a very small amount of time and have just conversations with people for no reason other than just talk, right? In the same group. We've seen the same thing, Phil?
But that's
You hit it on the head. I mean, look, it's so funny because I started at Cross River in 2016, early 2017, and with the goal of let's talk about what we do, right? Let's just go out there and talk about what we're trying to accomplish, right? It's not. I wasn't, again, and I'm no Jesse genius, right? Jesse is the brains of the operation. My job was to tell the story, right? To our regulators, to policymakers, to other community banks, tell people what we're doing because inevitably that'll grow the ecosystem. I remember we started in 2016, we started kind of a little association of just banks that were playing in the tech space, period. No agenda outside of like, let's just get together once a month and talk. And we started an organization, again, in 2016 called the Online Lending Policy Institute, right? It was just a group of tech companies and banks and regulators who wanted to get together once every couple of months and talk. That's all it was, right? And it grew today. It sort of grew to sort of a different type of organization. It's called the American FinTech Council, right? Which is now, I think, almost 100 members with every big and little company in it. And it's growing every day. It's adding more and more members. And that started with what you guys just said, let's just talk. Let's find a way to talk. And here's the thing. I'm in these conversations with absolute competitors. I want to be clear about that, right? Banks that are competitors, tech companies that are competitors, we all sort of can make each other better, period. And that's our goal.
Yeah. I think to answer, maybe even the question of like, hey, I want to become a sponsor bank. What do I do? Right? What's step one? Right. And, I think that the first step is getting organized. I was actually just talking to someone about this the other day, right? The first step is culturally accepting that it's not going to be perfect. That if you go into it and say, we're going to be a sponsor bank, we're going to spend months and months and months trying to pay consultants, to pay this, to pay that, do whatever, and then we're going to, do it and it's going to be amazing and we're not going to have any issues. Guarantee you'll never get started. That the biggest thing you could do, especially at a strategic senior leadership level, right, is say, we're going to do this. We're going to do it together. It's not going to be perfect, but if we don't take the first step, we're never going to take the second. And I promise you as a senior leader, if we take the first step and we stumble, it's going to be okay.
And
right?
That's a big part of what we're all here today to talk about, with bankers helping bankers. There's help. Nobody's going to charge you money to come ask a question. So we're all here to help. Pick up the phone, let us help you out. We'll guide you to the right areas to do these things. It's really important that we not paralysis at the gate, right?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, it's the analysis by paralysis thing kills people. You do that, you never get anything done, right?
And what's happening today to all of us is, a traditional banker going down the street, done this for 87 years the same way, and it's like a slow bleed. It's like, we know we're not making as much money and we know we're having a tough time. And now people are kind of talking, maybe we ought to sell our bank.
Tried to answer why it's information overload.
But we're having this also creepy conversation that's coming in the door about maybe we ought to think about it's a good time to sell. All right. This is not a good time to sell. This is a terrible time to sell. This is a time to embrace these other areas, but everyone has the same question. What's my first step? And what Jesse said is take the damn first step. You got people all over the place
Screw it
trying to
up on
help you.
purpose is a
You're
good
gonna make a
first step.
boo-boo.
I mean, listen, I mean, I was talking to, Phil, when I joined, I was telling the story of Mantle, right? Like I was telling the story of Mantle to a colleague earlier today, actually, and I was telling a very different version, which was, like we had to get this thing done. And was it the perfect fit? No, right? We had challenges, we had issues, we had to figure it out. I was, solving problems, but what do people remember? Right? People remember what you accomplish and remember what you did, not what you didn't do, right? You have regrets about what you didn't do. You don't have regrets about the things that you tried to run a mile in 7 minutes, right? You got it done in 7:30. No one's mad at that, right? I busted my butt, right? And I can't run a mile in 7:30 either, so don't worry. So, but that you know that but if you don't ever try, you're guaranteed to never be successful.
Yeah,
One of the things that we talk to about with everyone, and Phil, I really want you to address this for me. When we get to, okay, how do I bet a fintech? Is the second question I get all the time. And it's like, well, first we need to talk about strategy. Do you want to do the asset side? Do you want to be on the card side? What is the objective? We talked earlier about like non-interest income revenue, right? What is the objective that you're trying to achieve? Then let's go about trying to find and serve those people. Can you address how you go about picking a fintech for a specific?
He's had some good ones so far. I like the little tidbits.
Look, I can tell you kind of sort of where we found partnerships. What I said earlier sort of still drives us. It's so interesting. I just came back from a trip overseas where we have over 120 employees. And my goal to go over there was to really sort of get them to understand who we were and really infuse our culture into employees that don't often get to see the bank. And I was talking to them about our growth and our evolution. And the idea very, very simply that, everything that we do is not going to be perfect, but the organic growth, you sort of try to breathe some ingenuity into everything you're doing. And so everything you're doing, that's prescribed, great. You know how to do X, Y, or Z, as Jesse said, you know how to code, great. That's all great. Jesse it's funny because he doesn't talk about it, right? Like he has all that ability, but that's not what he does every day, right? Like he does just enough of that. When I call him and ask him a question, he'll do these complicated searches for me and run numbers for me. But at the end of the day, he's doing what I think he loves to do, which is sort of bring people together, which is to drive new innovation, to come up with new creative ideas. And most of them, and I can tell you because I've witnessed it, most of them don't work. They absolutely don't work. And I'm going to tie this. I'll tie this.
He's right. He's 100% right.
But here's the thing. I'm going to tie this to PPP, right? Because we did not solve, Congress passed it at the end of March. Program was open on April 3rd, okay? We did not solve the entire thing in that 10 days. Now we solved chunks of it, but the program opened and we needed to take in applications in, the right way. And then you needed to solve for how you're going to underwrite those applications and how you're going to collect the documents and how you're going to review the documents. And as we solved each problem and as the days went on, we reckoned, as we did in 2010, oh shit, there's a new problem. Like, and how do you solve for that? Jesse and I were literally on the phone, like, 22 hours a day in those early months of PPP, because at 3 a.m, inevitably something would break, right? There would be something that would be an issue and that had to be solved. And then once you did all that, okay, how do we fund these loans, right? How are we going to push the money out, right? And what technology can we use and what partners can we bring in? And I remember solving it problem at a problem. It was literally like, it was so, it's funny, you think about it now, and there's sometimes I talk about the story and it just gives me aggravation and stress because it was so hard. But the ingenuity. Look, when Jesse's here, I talk about it differently because him and I are very pragmatic in the way we approach everything we do. It's funny, I was just reading the book on Airbnb and they were struggling early on until someone recognized that 80% is good enough, right? Let's get to 80%, then we'll figure out the rest, but let's open up and get to 80%. That's what we tried to do in the PPP program. And I don't have to tell you, we made more loans than any other bank in the country, right? Outside of Bank of America, the second highest lender in the entire country. We didn't solve it like that. And we didn't open our doors with a perfect system, but we made it better every single day. It got incrementally better. And it worked. It absolutely worked. And that's what people remember.
Is that a taste of the future, Phil? I'm sorry if that sounds like some crazy profound question, but when we talk banking as a service, or do we call it embedded finance, or this new fintech world, or what is a fintech? You being the second largest lender of PPP, and how much you guys participate in embedded finance and banking as a service, is that a taste of the future for the rest of us? I mean, it just seems like a right in the face. There it is. Look, an event happened, and look what you were able to do.
I think that it's not, my opinion is it's not a taste of the future. I think that what it is just what's always been, right? You know, that if we think about it, the folks who have been able to adapt to a unique situation have figured out how to find success, and it's maybe taken some time to get there, right? You know, that I don't think that in 2000, how many of us had made a purchase from Amazon, right? You know, today, how many? Okay, I mean, I had two, but like, you know, it was
Two nerds.
probably Phil had it, right? So, you know, and like, there was also a real concern about like, do I feel safe using my credit card online, right? You know, there were encumbrances that held back things from actually happening, and I think that when some of those kind of those things that were holding back kind of what we all take for granted today fell backwards, there were people able to seize that opportunity. I think that what we're really going to see is that banking has changed before, it will continue to change. I could throw around lots of crazy acronyms of what's going to happen with like central bank digital currency or this or that, right? You know, like who the hell knows? This is the short answer, right? You know, that there's many things I am not a fortune teller. That what I do know is that the ones who will be successful are the ones who build cultures that can accept good enough and that create and, you know, accept change, right? Get people to go into conversations figuring out how to make it happen as opposed to reasons why it shouldn't happen. And that, you know, the reason why we were successful in PPP, yeah, we had a lot of tech, but candidly, a lot of other banks could have done what we did, to be very honest with you, right? There's nothing theoretically stopping them from doing it, right? From a technical standpoint, there's banks I've worked for that could have done it, right? But they all found reasons why they only wanted to service their customers, right? And some had great reasons for do it, some had other reasons, right? For us, you know, I think there's a lot of things that you know, every organization has its faults. One thing I'll never fault Cross River's leadership for is saying we need to do what we think is right for the moment and for the times. And that our CEO made a call to action from every single person in the bank, lined us up and said, and this was before the economics of the program were known, anything, and said, we are going to do this. I don't care what it takes, figure it out. And so
country did that.
I love that.
And this is really important, guys. Bankers all over the country, I mean, just bled for these customers of theirs. And this is really why the time we got left, if we kind of shift this conversation a little bit, small business, oh my goodness, that's really what this whole conversation is about. Small business, fintech, and I hate that word because it means so many things to so many people, but let's talk about outside technology purveyance into banking, okay? That process that goes on is instigated from the outside in. And sometimes from the inside, hey, we come up with a great idea and we institute it. Sometimes it's a super outside force like the government and PPP. We react, we do the best we can to serve our people. But at the end of the day, what we're talking about here is small business. And this is what gets me, and me and you had a great talk about this the other night. He's like, you know, you run a small business. How many bankers have run a small business? Man, you could run a hot dog stand and learn a ton.
Well, you walk into your banker, right, at a community bank, and whoever that is, that staff that you're talking to doesn't own a small business.
Yeah.
And
well, he asked me,
it's really interesting,
this
right?
is so cool, this conversation we had. He said, hey, Dad, if you went to a banker and said, what would you need to change? How could I help you do? And I said, man, if you would just set up a business room that I could walk into and tell me how I can change my payroll, how I can move my accounts, how I
And he
can get my
explained
tax
all
taken
of these
care of.
things that only I would know.
Yeah, everything
right?
from
You
invoicing
wouldn't know.
to tax settlements to unemployment. I mean, just all the things that a business person has to do. How can I pick this up and bring it over to your bank and get it here? And can you do that for me?
But let me give you an interesting one. We were actually talking about Autobooks, friends of ours, right? And their founders are actually business owners building products for banks,
Yeah.
small businesses on behalf of their small business customers.
Right.
So the people building the scalable software are business owners built for business owners.
Right.
Isn't that an interesting paradox?
But that's the thing though. Listen to these people when they've come up with a technology answer,
Hey.
they are going to be successful.
Yes.
Now, to your point, and both of you have made the same point here, that for the banker out there, hey, you just got to try. And I think what he's really saying is just listen to a smart customer that tells you something he really needs and maybe has a tech solution for that. Maybe let's go down that path a little bit.
So Phil, question for you. You got through, I believe, the bulk of the story. We got pretty current, right? What is, let's say, the end of the story, and where is the future of the story? Where's the story go next?
So, I mean, it's funny, Jesse's here because he single-handedly, and maybe a little help from others, sort of got Cross River into RTP, right? And he sort of figured it out and said, and the question was like, why are we doing that? Like, what's the, like, he's like, look, we need to, like, we were doing lending, right? We're very heavy in the online lending space. Like, we need to start to evolve that. And how are we going to do that? And the idea of moving into BaaS and sort of really enabling payment systems. And Jesse's like, look, let's figure out RTP, right? Let's sort of take that next step. And he actually, again, sort of got us over that finish line. I mean, look, I can't tell the future either. I think, there's obviously a lot of talk about crypto, but I think it really comes back to moving money, right? Doing what bankers know what they're do what they do, but just doing it differently and doing it quicker, doing it more efficiently, doing it safer. I mean, there's just sort of more. Jesse said it perfectly earlier. You're not doing anything radically or drastically different. You're just, you're doing what you already know. You're just evolving it and putting it more and innovating it.
I love it because crypto, blockchain, terrifying. And it's like, what he actually said was money movement.
Right.
Right. And we all forget that with these scary concepts that come up that seem so terrible. But at the end of the day, everybody in any space is having to learn that new area and that new vertical. And on the topic of money movement, who better than a community banker to understand that?
Right.
You already got a leg up. What more do you want? Right. We're all from the biz and we know what we're doing.
Well,
we should push into those new areas.
There's a bunch of us that are all actively talking all the time about the technology of blockchain and how to work with that and how to onboard, on ramp and off ramp the payment system and things like that. So we're talking it through right now. We all know there's holes in the boat still, and people like Jesse I guarantee he'll come up with a way to patch it.
Figure something out.
So we're all relying on you. No pressure, man. But
Yes, right. It's okay. Don't worry about it. I don't take anything you say seriously. So
yeah. But this is
just kidding. But
I'll get there. But in the interim, what we're all trying to do here in Bankers Helping Bankers is set up a platform, a community where people can come together and solve problems without having to spend a fortune on, nothing pisses me off worse than people that spend a bunch of money on a consultant and end up with the wrong answer.
Right. Consultants and misinformation are a heck of a
There
problem.
isn't a problem in banking that bankers haven't dealt with. Let's talk to other bankers. And when everybody's willing to do that together, and we'll be the conduit, we'll do whatever we need to do to help you. But this is fantastic that you guys have come together here to offer your time and offer your expertise and your cowboy hat from Lukenbach, Texas, from the Roundup.
So I want to just say one thing, just to kind of put a point on what you were saying, right? And I was thinking a little bit about, your question of like, how do you get started, right? And the whole idea of bankers helping bankers. And, we're not called money center banks, right? We're called community banks. And so, I really think that if you want to go into the fintech arena, just like if you want to get in a new type of lending or anything else, right? You'd call up someone in the business and talk to them about it. Candidly, we all have done participations. We've all done syndications. There's no reason why you can't take on a fintech challenge the same way, right? You split risk between two banks who know each other, right? You both bring different pieces to the table. You don't need to solve the whole thing at once, right? But we all have similar problems, it's really like, how do we come together and realize that what we do and who we serve is a critical part of, I think, of the DNA of what makes the US banking system special. And that blockchain, yada, 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 great tech, super compelling, right? But I this thing I heard today kind of opened my eyes to it. The total amount of transactions on blockchain last year, I think this guy said, was $300 billion something, which sounds like a lot of money, right? But like, that's a fraction of what gets moved in the US in an entire, in a day, right? And it was the CEO of crypto.com who was saying, oh, well, we see that the next big opportunity is gaming, and gaming is, you know, a $3 trillion market. And I'm sitting there and I'm still like, well, yeah, that's a lot, but that's like maybe what's moved in the US in like a day and a half. And so, you know,
ACH, there's the money.
There's real things that we can do to say, how do we make people's businesses better? How do we do things we're comfortable with? We push ourselves a little bit. We make our organizations feel safe while we do it. But, you know, this is not, none of these things we're doing are landing men on the moon, right? No one's going to die if we screw it up, right? And so, you know, if we look at things and we say we can't move forward because we're just, I think you said it great before, right? We're just paralyzed by the fear of failure. Like, I guarantee you'll fail. And so just go forward, lean on the community. And, you know, whether it's me, Phil, you know, anybody who I'm connected to, you know, we're all here to help figure it out. And, you know, just make it happen, right? You know, you're only going to know what you can do if you try to do it.
Awesome. And huge thank you. I think, look, you mentioned all the states. There's a lot of people that come together. You guys, us, all the state associations, all the bankers, everybody coming together to try and work on these things together. Doesn't mean we're all the best at it. Maybe you guys are. Sorry.
Just the exception.
Whoops.
Yeah.
Okay. We're not. But I think it's actually a great point. How many things I see Chris Willison with IBAT in Texas, how many things get shepherded up to him with interesting questions that end up, he's calling going, hey, can you help me with this, right? So state associations are a great resource. You guys are a great resource. Phil, final thoughts on that topic. What are the resources that bankers should be using? Obviously, you guys, us, bankers helping bankers, the state associations. Anything else that you really like?
Interestingly enough, and I'll say this, and it's going to seem obvious with all the political paraphernalia behind me, right? When you talk to regulators, you actually get a tremendous amount of feedback. Talking to regulators, talking to policymakers. I mean, I was in a member of Congress's office who was like feeding me companies, like, oh, this company talked to me or this company reached out. And so, you know, again, it serves two purposes, right? If you're a community banker, engage with your regulators, with your policymakers. If you're curious, ask the question, right? It shouldn't like sort of stall you. It should just slow you down a bit, but ask the question, right? You don't want to be paralyzed. You want to continue to make the move forward, but you'd be surprised how much feedback you get. And I mentioned this earlier when we started the call. We used to go to state bank regulators who didn't regulate us. You know why? We wanted their ideas, right? These are smart guys in banking. We wanted their ideas. You know, I remember right now, right? Wyoming is hot in the tech and crypto industry. Wyoming is blowing up, right? Like it started with one person engaging the banking commissioner, right? Like that's how it started. And like, okay, what laws should we change? Let's go talk to some policymakers, right? And so again, I know I'm biased in that direction, but that's sometimes also the way you just get new ideas and how to get things done when you talk it through with folks who are getting it from every direction as well.
That's awesome.
Well, I think what we could say here to wrap this thing up is everybody better stand back and get the hell out of the way, because bankers coming together is something that should have been done a long time ago. It's something we're doing now, and together we're stronger without a doubt. And everybody's here to try to move into the future together. The idea that we need to go sell our bank is the only way to get scale or survive is absolutely an incorrect narrative. There's opportunities right now more than ever before. And guys like you bringing it, man, I really appreciate it.
Appreciate you guys
We're huge
so
fans,
much. Thank you.
and appreciate your time and your expertise and your willingness to help other bankers.
Yeah.
Love you guys.
Anytime.
Thanks for doing it.
Sorry
All
I was late again. I'm glad I was able to make it.
Good, man. See you guys.